Thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedules to spend with us today. And welcome to our session entitled Breaking Down Silos, Simplifying Advertising Across Planning, Activation, Optimization, and Measurement. My name, as the AI voice of God shared, is Jenna Neumann. I'm a director of account development at Claritas, and I'm joined by our partner, Justin Proffitt, who's the senior director of strategic partnerships for Comcast Advertising. Today, consumers experience media seamlessly across streaming TV, linear TV, social platforms, podcasts, gaming, digital media. But often, advertisers and marketers are still forced to manage these experiences across different platforms with fragmented measurement and disparate workflows. It's a bit like a traveler taking a direct flight, but managing the trip as three connecting flights with four different booking platforms and their luggage lost somewhere in Chicago. Thank you for the smirk. And this disconnect is becoming more important than ever. In Deloitte's latest release of their Digital Market Trends report, they cited that consumers are spending around 6 hours a day consuming media and entertainment content. However, increasingly, they're spending these hours across a growing number of platforms, which means that no single channel owns the consumer. Furthermore, they found that there's fluidity in terms of how they're engaging with these different devices, different platforms, and experiences, which leads to fragmented attention, but the expectation is still that it's a seamless experience. If you spent any time recently with someone from Gen Z or Gen Alpha, you can maybe attest to the fact that this is true. Oftentimes, they'll have an AirPod in one ear listening to a podcast while FaceTiming their friend and playing a game on their iPad while watching their favorite show in the background. And that's because consumers don't think in channels. They're just kicking back and thinking about what they want to watch next. But unfortunately, marketers are often forced to think in these channels and these silos. And that disconnect makes it harder because as the audiences are experiencing media seamlessly as one journey, the advertising ecosystem remains highly fragmented. This means that marketers are forced to manage multiple different data providers, multiple audience definitions, multiple inventory sources, multiple activation platforms, I'm not done yet, and multiple measurement methodologies. And each one of these handoffs creates friction, and each one of these silos creates inefficiency. And in totality, that makes it harder than ever for marketers to understand if they're even reaching core audiences. Are they controlling for frequency? And are they able to move the needle and measure their business outcomes? This is a challenge that our industry is aware of. Industry groups like the VAB and the ANA have been advocating for a long time to have more transparency and cross-platform measurement. And advertisers are increasingly demanding a more connected ecosystem or environment where they can plan, activate, and measure their campaigns. At the end of the day, our advertisers are not asking us for more data or more dashboards. What they're asking for is simplicity. And what we lack is not inventory or content. What we often lack is coordination and that continuity. And the brands that are going to win in the space are not necessarily those that have the most data. They're the ones that can connect the pieces together, that can make it a seamless process for their advertising partners across planning, activation, optimization, and measurement. All of us in this room have more data than we did 5 years ago. We have more platforms. Lord knows we have more AI than we did 5 years ago. So why does it feel like it's harder than ever to execute a campaign? Justin, I'm curious what you're hearing from your advertiser partners on where this process flow is breaking down.
Thanks, Jenna.
Mhm.
So I really liked your comparison about how the consumer experiences this fragmentation versus how a marketer does, because I think to my own house, right? Like I'm at any given point, I'm looking at something on my phone, my wife's watching something on her iPad, and I've watched Bluey for probably the 9,000th time that day because my son's addicted to it, right? And it's all happening At the same time, it's chaotic, but for the consumer, it's totally seamless. But a marketer tends to experience this a lot like a relay race. So first they're planning their campaign, they move on to activation, optimization, and measurement. A lot of times it's a different team that the handoff happens to because there's a different set of criteria you have to get through for activation versus measurement. Different platforms, different information, and a lot of times different data. And sometimes that's fine. You know, each brand has a totally unique set of KPIs that they're trying to to create. But other times, you introduce an opportunity for there to be a disconnect. If you use one set of data for activation and another set of data for measurement, you can create a disconnect between what you're aiming for to happen versus what you're measuring to happen. An analogy that I like to give is imagine you're a football coach and you're calling plays in yards, but then the ref comes out to look at the first down in meters, right? Now, I'm a longtime New York Jets fan. We haven't won a Super Bowl since the '60s. I think that we do that every year, right? But go Knicks for all my New York friends out here. Um, but having said that, you know, it can create a challenge for the supply side too of the business. And the publishers, a lot of the publishers who are really, really strong in this right now that are able to help fix this are the publishers that have a really strong relationship with those eyeballs on the other sides of those screens and the inventory that that they have. Because when you have a strong relationship with those eyeballs, you tend to be able to collect really rich, differentiated, and strong first party data. Once you have that beachhead, you then have to start thinking through how do I organize that data for utility? How do I package it so that it works seamlessly across planning, activation, optimization, measurement? And bonus points when you can contain it in such a way that you can also merge it with your partner data, because then you've got the best of both worlds. You've got your beachhead, you have your unique first party data, great data. And then on top of it, you're able to meet the flexible needs of the marketers on the other side of those campaigns. But it's not easy to do that. Let's be honest. Like on the buy side and the sell side today, we're inundated with tons of different solutions. People will talk to you about first party data, their identity solutions, their measurement solutions. In the advertising ecosystem, there are whole experts dedicated to just one bullet on here. There are people that are just measurement experts, and they have a great POV on when you should use their data for measurement. And they're probably right. They have great use cases. Same thing for identity. People don't tend to try to sell you something that they don't believe in. There's plenty of great use cases for data, right? The challenge is not collecting more data. There's lots of data out there today for a marketer to get their hands on and a publisher. The challenge is how do you merge that together? How do you get all this data to swim in the same direction against that unique KPI that you're trying to deliver against, right? But when you are able to do that, there are huge ramifications, right? So an example I like to give is late last year, a company in the ad ecosystem called TruthSet came out with a study. So, for those of you who don't know TruthSet is a really interesting company in the advertising business because they're looking at data a little differently. A lot of times when we look at data, we think in terms of volume. I want to buy a lot of data. What's my match rate? Right? How much data can I possibly find with my different vendors? What TruthSet does is they look at data accuracy. They look at it to validate how accurate a data set is. And they did a study late last year where they looked at one signal that's used in advertising today, the IP address. And the reason why the IP address is so important before I get into their findings on this study is because just think about what Jenna and I are talking about. You're on your phone, you're on your tablet, your CTV device, all of those devices link back to the IP address. That's the household signal. So when you're able to leverage that the right way, you can deliver the right amount of impressions to the right households, and you can incrementally get to new households that you haven't maybe sent that message to enough, right? And what they found in the market was that when people try to link different signals to IP, they can be as low as 15% accurate on that. And that happens a lot of times when all the data that's being put together, isn't as methodically put together necessarily, right? But again, at a conference like this where there's some of us thinking about, content, there's some of us thinking about what makes for a good experience. What I want to say is good advertising creates a good experience. When you build those relationships with the subscribers to your app or those eyeballs, you're able to build that first party data that helps you commingle this stuff together to use it better, right? So sometimes the most valuable audience that you can go after is the audience you haven't reached enough. And you're able to do that, again, by building up rich first party data, having strong relationships with those eyeballs, and packaging it the right way. And that's why I'm also really excited about our partnership, Jenna. So we just, announced a partnership with Comcast and Claritas, where what we've done is we've taken the Claritas data all the way from planning to activation to measurement. And we've included it in our Outcomes Plus platform. And we've also included it in all of our planning and activation systems. Claritas has such a heritage in the market of doing a really good job of creating segments of psychographics, like people that have things in common with each other. And we can now activate that against all of our planning systems. And we can also have a neutral perspective on measurement that they can provide as well. So we're really excited about it. And speaking of measurement, Jenna, what's your perspective on how this relates to measurement? Do you see an impact when companies are able to do this well?
I do. Funny enough, who would
What a
have thunk
tia.
it? Oh, what a tee up. Thanks, Justin. I have lots of thoughts about measurement, believe it or not. And we do find that most measurement today operates like a GPS system that provides you with directions after you've already arrived at your destination. While maybe it's like cool to know where you came from anecdotally, it's infinitely more valuable to understand where you need to go next. We believe that measurement should not be a report card or a post campaign report that you get after the campaign has completed, often sometimes months after the campaign has completed. Measurement should be so much more than that. It should be a decision making tool that helps you understand what's working and what's not, and when to make adjustments so that you can drive performance forward while ad dollars are still being spent. It's important to have third-party unbiased measurement in this scenario because you need that transparency and that objectivity, and that continuity across all of these different platforms. We shouldn't just depend on each individual platform to report performance because they're only aware of the implications within their four walls. With third-party measurement, we have kind of the benefit of taking that step back and having more transparency across all of these different channels to have a consistent form of measurement. At Claritas, we found that our marketing partners who are really leaning into this accountability across their campaigns and their media buys are leaning into three core measurement capabilities. The first being attribution. And when I'm talking about attribution, at its core, it's about linking ad exposure back to a KPI. Not groundbreaking. But I am not talking about KPIs like a click rate or a video completion rate. What's very important is that we are giving advertisers measurement in the context of the business outcomes and KPIs that matter most to them. So if we're working with an e-commerce client, maybe it's important for them to know who went to their new landing page or who had a checkout start or checkout complete. Or we do a lot of work with Progressive Insurance. It's important for them to understand who did a quote start or a quote complete. So we believe that attribution is important to connect exposure to business outcomes in the context of what matters to advertiser partners. The second key capability is incrementality. And I know this came up actually earlier today on some of the other measurement panels that I was listening into. And what incrementality is doing is kind of a layer on top of attribution. It doesn't just tell us what happened, it tells us what happened as a result of advertising. And if you'll humor me with like somewhat of a double negative, we like to explain it as it says that X number of conversions would not have happened if you did not run this campaign. And as we already established, with consumers engaging across so many different channels, it's more important than ever that we understand or help our advertisers understand which tactics are actually driving performance versus which ones are just along for the ride. And it's also important because we have all of these different channels at play to understand the relative impact that each channel is playing or has on these different KPIs. So, how does CTV compare to podcast, compare to linear television? And when we have that perspective across all of these different channels and we have a measure like incrementality, that helps us determine if we're really driving business outcomes. The third key capability is optimization. It's my personal favorite because we believe that the best measurement informs action. So, to bring optimization to life, I will use a real example. We're working currently with a streaming partner on their subscriber acquisition campaigns. So, as we got it set up, their key KPIs are new trial starts and first pay subscriptions. And as we let the campaign mature for a little bit, we found about 4 weeks in that some of the creative associated with content franchises was driving significant positive lift in trial starts, while on the other hand, some of the creative was driving negative lift. So, what's important here is not necessarily what we learned, it's when we learned it. Because we learned this 4 weeks into a 12-week campaign, that gave the media team plenty of time to go in and adjust the media buy, double down on the best performing creative, and minimize their investment towards the underperforming creative. And that really exemplifies the sweet spot of measurement. We don't want it to be a descriptive tool, rear view mirror measurement, if you will, that tells you what happened in the past. We want it to be a prescriptive tool to help make your campaigns better while the campaign is still in flight. If you'll humor me one last time in closing with one last analogy, we can think of our industry as an orchestra. Maybe we have data and identity over here as the woodwinds. Maybe we have measurement as the brass. We have AI in the back as percussion. We have plenty of instruments in our orchestra. The challenge is getting them to all play the same song. We don't need more data and dashboards necessarily. What we need is greater orchestration. We need to bring together these disparate workflows to create continuity for our advertising partners. It's not about another silo, it's about creating that continuity across planning, activation, optimization, and measurement. We want to thank you guys for the time today. Justin and I will be in the back or up front. I think there's another session, so probably in the back after if you'd like to chat with us, or we're exhibiting at booth 413 if you want to stop by and say hello. But thank you again for the time. We appreciate it.